recording. And Sarah and Megan, if you'll turn your video on, I would appreciate that. So thank you. First of all, do any of you have any questions about anything so far that you need to talk with me about? Anyone? All right. I do know that some people have meetings with their boards of education or their community, and so they were not going to be able to attend tonight. I wanted to first talk about some of the information that you're going to find in your readings this week. So one of, if I can find the right one of the, okay, that's not what I want to share. One of the things that you're going to be talking about, if you look at your agenda, this is one of the articles. It's the second one that has the link to it. And there's one little section that I just pulled out, the high spots, and it's talking about how to measure skills and dispositions so that when you're hiring someone, you can figure this out. It starts out by talking about the value added and looking at scores and all that kind of stuff. Well, when you start to hire somebody and they're fresh out of college, you're not going to have any of that information. So this author is saying there's some skills and dispositions to look for. And he talks about persistence, organization and planning, valuing student learning, theory to practice, valuing at-risk students, approach to students, surviving in bureaucracy, explaining teacher success and explaining student success, and then fallibility, in other words, how the teacher anticipates dealing with mistakes in the classroom. Well, now all of those sound very good, and they sound like those are good things to know, but your biggest issue is going to be how do you determine all of that information in your interviews? You know, what kind of things are you going to look at to and listen for as you're asking questions? So that's just a look at another way of trying to help you find the best candidate to work in your school. I do want to talk about two things that came out in those of you that have already completed the marginal employees assignment. One of the things that I wanted you to also think about is in North Carolina, a few years ago, teacher assistants were given one additional protection that they did not have before, and that was you had to tell them why you were letting them go. Well, you know, that to me sounded like just what we should have done to start with, but evidently that wasn't required. And so that when that legislation passed a few years ago, then that became one of the things. If you have a teacher assistant that is doing a poor job, then you do have to share with them why it is you're going to let them go. So that was one thing. Find out as you're looking at marginal employees, depending on what area they're in, make sure that you know what the laws are related to them. I don't know whether South Carolina has something similar to that law or not. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and only one person mentioned this, and it was really an important piece, and I hadn't really thought about it, but one of you mentioned that whenever you are doing the evaluation on those teachers, you don't need to show that they're doing a good job if you're going to be setting a development plan for improvement. And that is key. It does not need to be that they are working at a satisfactory level, whatever the terminology is for your current instrument, but that you put at least one below. If there is a problem, now it could be they're very proficient in several areas, but there needs to, whatever you are identifying and looking at as a reason to get rid of an employee, you need to make sure that you mark that area down, and so that when you get to a point of you're having to present the information, Your evaluation should match what you have on your professional development plan, and also what you have as your coaching and mentoring, and everything should fit together. Otherwise, that you are leaving a loophole for them to not follow your recommendation. So it's really important that you connect all those pieces. You know, teachers can come in and say, well, I got a really good evaluation last year, but yet my principal started this at the beginning of this year. Well, it shouldn't have been a really good evaluation if the principal was going to start a professional development plan for improvement, or an action plan, or whatever you want to call it, the very next year. So it all needs to match up if you want to be successful. And I think everybody wants to be successful in helping the teachers. It's not fun to go through dismissing a teacher, and most everyone wants the people that are working for them to be successful. So, you know, just try to, if you do head that route of you're going to have to terminate someone regardless of what level, make sure you have all your paperwork to match. So that's really important. When I read that, I thought, oh, this is one thing that we really need to talk about. Another part of the article, one of the articles talked about the factors of organizational success. And Jim Collins identified 4. And you've all heard these: getting the right people on the bus, getting the right people in the right seats, getting the wrong people off the bus, and then this person said that humble leaders with indomitable will, and that helps make people go from good to great. So that's another little piece of looking at your organization. Sometimes you can have a really, really good teacher at the 8th grade level, and they're not very good at the 3rd grade level. And yes, I know most in North Carolina it's K-6 and then middle school and then high school, but there are some that have an older certificate that may go K-8, or they may have a K-6 and a middle grade certification in a certain area. So you find that. So sometimes people may have the certifications needed to do a job, but they may not be the very best person for the job at another level. So it is important to have the right person in the right place. Now, we've already talked this semester about leadership, and we went over several weeks ago what your textbook, the principal textbook, had about different kinds of leadership styles. And one of the things that it continues to sort of focus on, and you hear a lot about, is transformational leadership. So I went on the internet and pulled a few things for us to look at tonight regarding transformational leadership. And what I found was exactly what you would think. It's where you encourage, you inspire, you motivate your employees, and you create change that will help growth and shape the future success. Now, this set up the company, but you're talking about of the school. And then some of the characteristics that I found of transformational leaders is they're organized, they expect their followers to be creative, they are team-oriented, and they expect that everyone will work together to create the best possible results. They are respected, and they respect others. They do act as the coach of a team, and they provide training and motivation to reach the desired goals. They feel responsible for the team that they're working with, but they also expect each individual team member to accept responsibility. They engender respect through their rapport and their personal influence. And then another section came up with some advantages and disadvantages of transformational leaders. They work well where change is needed, and it's not the right fit for a new organization where there's no structure. So if you're in a situation where there's very little structure, and that shouldn't be in schools, but sometimes you can be in a school where it's not organized very well, then that's not the type of leadership that you're going to need to use. And some of the pros for transformational leadership: you need to be excellent at communicating new ideas. good at balancing short-term and long-term goals, experience in strong coalitions and establishing mutual trust, and integrity and high emotional intelligence. In other words, you have empathy with the others. Some of the problems with transformational leadership is it's ineffective in an initial stage or in ad hoc situations. It requires an existing structure to fix, and it's a bad fit in many bureaucratic structures. And then another article pointed out that one of the best uses of this leadership style is in an organization that's outdated and requires serious retooling. So it's a perfect match for a small company that has big dreams and wants to change and adapt to get there. Now, when you stop and think about schools in changing and retooling, there are some schools across the state in North Carolina that have been identified as high-risk schools that if they don't get some things improved soon, then they're going to be taken over by either some form of another group to try to run those schools and see if they can't get them doing better. So that might be an area that you would want to look for a transformational leader, someone who can guide the staff, not necessarily pick the staff, but guide the staff to make changes from what they have been making. Now, some of those schools have to totally restructure. And in those situations, sometimes the teachers have to reapply for their own jobs. And it's very, very stressful for them. It's stressful for everybody involved, including the administrator that goes there. A lot is expected. And then if they happen to be in one of the schools at one of the universities has been identified as a coach or a group that pairs with that school to help them improve, then they may have to go through a whole lot of staff development. So there's various approaches that are being used in the state of North Carolina, and I suspect South Carolina has similar ways of looking at it because it's all based on No Child Left Behind. That's where all this restructuring started. That's where all the testing data started. And we just need to remember that it wasn't your local boards of education or your local, even at the state level that came up with this. This was federal legislation, and the piece that goes with federal legislation, most systems cannot turn it down. While they don't get a lot of money most of the time from the federal government, they get the money for exceptional children, career and technical education, school food service, and Title I, the reading programs. So most schools can't do without that, especially when you're trying to provide information for everyone. So because of the No Child Left Behind, all of these states had to come in and develop a plan and for improvement of the lowest performing schools. And so it wasn't something that anybody particularly wanted. Yes, they wanted their schools to improve, but they certainly hoped they would never get to the restructuring part. But that is where we are with some of them, and it all goes back to the No Child Left Behind. So just make sure you realize that. Some other leadership styles with a brief definition include democratic build consensus, and that's democratic means building consensus through participation. Authoritative, you know exactly what that is. The leader leads the team in the direction they want to go. Coaching, that's where the leader helps people develop for the future. Visionary, you're clear about what you believe and know what is best for learning. Servant leader, that's one that became talked about in the last probably 10 or 15 years. And that's where you put trust in the process and in the people they're working with, assuming that those within the organization will align with the goals. Now, there's a lot more. Some of the same things are called, they have different titles depending on who the authors are that are writing about them. And as you think about your leadership style, what I want you to be aware of is most of us are not all one thing. We usually pick parts of 2 or 3 leadership styles, and we also have to take into account our own personality. You know, if we don't feel comfortable in any one of those, then we have to find the parts that we do feel comfortable with. Your personality helps you lead that school, and one of the things that people have to feel good about is you. They have to feel good that, first of all, they can trust you, that what they tell you, you will keep in confidence, that you will not go around and talk about them, and that you will help them, because most of the time people want the help. They want to get better. I've seen very few people who chose to go to work to do a bad job. So, you know, they want you to help them, and many of them will come to you and say, I don't know what to do with this kid, or I have no clue what to do with this group. Everything I've tried doesn't work. So, and you're not going to have all the answers either. And that's the thing that I want to encourage you to remember. You will not have all the answers about how to run a school. You will know what has worked for you with your personality in your classroom and in the other jobs you've had. But you will always get a group that there is nothing that's working with them. It just hasn't worked, and you have to keep seeking things. And I'll use the example, I don't think I have with this group, but if I have, I'll apologize. When I first started teaching, I taught high school, I wanted my students in a U shape, and I sat in the center of the end, because that way I could see everybody's face, and I could see whether they were comprehending what we were talking about or not. That worked great for several years. I got a group that was very immature, and I've never had another group like them. But it didn't matter where I sat them. If they were next to each other, they were going to be touching each other. They were going to be kicking each other. They were going to be doing something they shouldn't have done. And so that year with that group, we had seats in a row. There was space in between each seat. And that's the only way I could get them to pay attention. And even then it was a struggle. And I had to continually move around the room and be somewhere in the middle to keep their hands on their for themselves instead of on everybody else's stuff. So whatever you do, you may have to get out of your style and your comfort level, because when I went to the straight lines and rows, that was not what my belief was, but that's what I had to do to keep my sanity. And I think that's something that you all know from teaching, but it's also something that when you're a school administrator, the same thing's going to begin to happen to you. So just think about yourself and the simple definitions of the different leadership styles, and figure out what you think is the best style for you, or combination of styles. And then you'll develop and you'll change over time. And when you look at your personality profiles and you do some of those personality profile tests, you'll also change. When I was first in administration, I was more on one side. And the longer I've stayed in administration, the more I moved to the center. And sometimes that happens. And I actually wound up aligning myself more so with the accountants in our central office than I did the creative side, which was usually our elementary supervisors. And it was really interesting because to start with, I was more on the creative side, but the longer I stayed in administration, the more I moved toward the way of looking and looking at things the way accountants did. So sometimes the jobs you have forces you into looking at things a little bit differently. The other thing I want you, while we're talking about leadership briefly, what I want you to think about is the type leadership that you respond best to. And that would be something that you would also want to incorporate into your own style. You know, if you have a way of interacting with your principal and there's one style that really, this is the way you learn best and you work best with that person, then you might want to figure out how to make that part of your style, because obviously that's something that you enjoy, that relationship and that leadership style. And if you do enjoy that, others are going to as well. So think about that. Now, I got a book this week. Well, let's see if I can find it. Of course, I'm not going to find it. Yeah, it is. It's ASCD's newest publication, and you probably can't read it, but it's Your Students, My Students, Our Students, Rethinking Equitable and Inclusive Classrooms. So it's got some good information, and it talks about, it says, it explores the hard truths of current special ed and outlines 5 essential disruptions to the status quo. So it starts out talking about special ed, but there's a whole lot of things that's in here that would be applicable to anybody. And it's talking about what you're wanting to do is establish a school culture that champions equity and inclusion, rethinking the longstanding structure of least restrictive environment and to the service delivery plan, and leveraging the strengths of all educators to provide appropriate support and challenge. And that's one of the keys, that also when you're working and you're in a school that's so focused on testing, the PE gets left out, the art and music, that's often the first thing's cut. And those are many times the programs that kids feel good about, they have fun doing, and they need those releases. So, you know, think about all the people in your school that's not directly attached to a test, but that's really important for the benefit of the children. And it also says collaboration, and you've done a lot of that this semester. You've been collaborating on looking at your data and coming up with best practices, so you've had a lot of that. And then it says honor the aspirations of your students and plan accordingly. So you need to get to know your students, and when they're real young, you're not going to know what their aspirations are except to get to the next grade level. But as they get older, they will have an idea of what they want to do. So there are always books coming out from ASCD that provide some good information, and a lot of times they are very applicable to the classroom or to things that you all are having to face. For the next few classes, I think we have 3 more. Yes, we have 3 more. If there is a topic that you've read about or you want more information about because we've not talked about it enough, if you will either email me, or if you know what it is right now that you would like us to concentrate on, if you'll just tell me that, then I will focus on those for the next 3 weeks in addition to what is in your assignments. Do you all have anything you would like to add right now? Like I said, we're probably going to have some short sessions, but I want to cover things that will be beneficial. And one of the reasons I have chosen so many times looking at case studies is I think that's where you can look at things that's actually happening to people, and you can think about what they did, and then you can think, okay, if I were in that situation. And you would also be surprised at how many of the situations you'll get in that'll be similar to what you've read about in a case study. And then you will have a little bit of information in your brain that will come to the surface when you need it. So just for reminders, if you've not completed the APSL, please get that done and submit it to turn it in my class shell. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I was caught up with everything that's been turned in. Dr. Bullis would like me to mention and remind you that you need to complete the work that's required for your competency folio and submit that to him for his review. If you've not already done that, please do that. You would need to complete the reading assignments listed in week 12. Each one of those articles is short. And then the chapters in the book, I chose your school leadership that we've not been using a lot. And those are like 3 to 5 pages each. So the first one is continuing to look at leadership. So that's the first chapter, 21st Century School Leadership Best Practices. And the other one is chapter 16, which is the chart attack. And I picked out a few questions, but there's also the thing I want you to remember about this book. It gives you the scenario, then it asks you some questions, and then it follows up with some comments. And I did pick for you to look at the comments for at least one of the questions, because I want you to examine what they're saying, and then I want you to think about what you know, and you pick out what you think is the most important of the information that they have suggested. So anything else that you would like? Okay, one of the questions I have is, with the email from the clinical coach 2 on competency folio, is that Dr. Bullis? Yes, that is Dr. Bullis. He is the one that needs to look at your competency folio, and so then he will submit an email to you, which you can send to me, that it is complete and finished and he's happy with what you've done. Yes, very good question. All right, anything else? You all are awfully quiet tonight. Are you tired? Well, it won't be long. We've got 3 weeks after this one. So if you will send to me a topic that you think we've not covered enough in an introductory principalship course, and I will make sure I focus on that for one of the next 3 weeks. Anything else? All right, I hope you don't mind us ending quicker. I doubt that you do, especially if you're tired. All right, if you have no other questions or anything, I'll stop the recording. I hope you all have a wonderful week. And I do have a new little grandson. He was born last Wednesday morning. They wound up having to do a C-section. So it was last Wednesday morning. So he is a tiny little thing, 4 pounds, 7.5 ounces when he was born. And so he is still, but he was 18 inches long. So he really was a tiny little thing. So, but mother got to come home on Saturday and he got to come home on Monday. So everybody's doing well so far. All right, y'all have a great week. I'm going to stop the recording. Good night.
Good night. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, I'm really proud of all of you that attend these, because your work's in and you're in good shape, and the work that you do is very, very good as well. So y'all have a great evening.